Hello friends, you all have been asking for it, and it has happened. Leica has announced the next iteration of monochrome camera, the Leica M11 monochrome. Look at her. Such a beauty in all of her monochrome, stark industrial design glory. If you aren't familiar with Leica's monochrome cameras, they are digital cameras that only capture monochrome images. No color at all. The sensor is monochrome only. When I received this camera on loan from Leica, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I wanted to revisit the study into Ansel atoms that I did when the M11 was introduced last year. In it, I looked at this book, studied the images and a little about the intentions of Mr. Adams, and I went on a sunrise hike with the M11 in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona, trying to bring some of my learnings into my photography that morning. You'll notice that these images are in color while Ansel Adams largely used black and white. I chose to use color for that project, but for the M11 monochrome, I created black and white images in a similar study of Mr. Adams, looking at texture, line, and shape. At this point, you may have realized that this isn't a review of this camera. I won't be discussing a lot of the technical specifications in this video. Rather, I'm focusing on what the camera can do for me and for you, though I will mention certain tech specs when it applies to my project. That being said, there are certainly other videos being posted right now that discuss tech specs and that compare different monochrome variants. In the description of this video, I will link to a couple of channels of friends of mine that I'm almost certain will have videos up this morning. When you're done here, go check both of them out. When I discuss improving your photography, I often talk about timing, light, and location, getting out there with your camera at times and places where photography is optimal. One thing that I admire most about Ansel Adams is that he got himself out there, way out there. He traveled far and wide, even to places that today are difficult to get to. If he saw an opportunity, he took it, even if it meant stopping on the side of the road or waiting for the clouds to get into just the right position. For this project, Raymond and I didn't travel very far, but when we saw that we had moody, cloudy skies one afternoon, we dropped everything and said, "Kids, we'll order your pizzas from the car. They'll be delivered soon. We gotta go." They're used to that by now, and they're teenagers, so they love it when we take off and order them food. So off we went to our nearby desert to take advantage of a moody, cloudy evening in the Sonoran Desert near Phoenix, Arizona. This desert is actually the same area that I did my original M11 project in. But while I had a clear morning for that project, we took this opportunity for the M11 monochrome because clouds almost always make a photo more interesting. And in the desert, we don't get many cloudy days. You really do have to jump on it when they appear. This evening, the heavy cloud cover had definition to it that I thought would be interesting in combination with the desert. Raymond and I hiked out, stopping quite often for photos. He carried my lenses and captured B-roll while I was stingy with the M11 monochrome. This photo from Monument Valley is an example of something I see relatively often in Mr. Adams' work. He points his camera up at his subject and centers it in the frame. So when I came upon this cactus in the distance, popping up above the desert brush and up against that moody sky, I thought, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to place the main subject of the photo in the middle of the frame. I even have brush coming up on either edge to further frame the saguaro. But you know what? I don't like it. It's totally personal preference, and this is mine. I rarely like a subject in the middle of the frame. And just because I'm studying Ansel Adams does not mean I have to copy him. So I cropped it. I chose a vertical orientation, and now it seems that the subject is still the saguaro, but this crop also draws the viewer's interest to the second saguaro further in the distance, which then leads to the hazy mountains in the far distance. I think that these types of failed attempts, for lack of a better term, where I try something new inspired by another artist, but I don't like it. I think that is just as valuable as trying something new and loving it, especially if you're a new photographer who is still developing your own style. And determining what you don't like is just as important as figuring out what you do like. I had the 35mm lens on the camera at this point, and I wasn't ready to change the lens, but I did want a closer crop on these cactus spines. So I captured the image, envisioning the framing that I actually wanted, knowing that I would crop it in post-processing. Because this camera has a ton of megapixels, 60 to be exact, I knew I had plenty of latitude to crop. So when I was envisioning the framing I wanted, I considered that I wanted this to be a somewhat abstract photo where the viewer could get a little lost in the tangle of spines, these crisscrossing lines, rather than just a photo of a barrel cactus. The ridges of the cactus create a framework for the bunches of spines that lead us right to the central tangle of spines that I made sure was all within the depth of field by using an aperture of f2.8. f2.8 sounds wide, but on a 35mm lens and at the distance I was from the cactus, f2.8 was perfect. Here's another example where Mr. Adams pointed his camera up at his subject, this time a youngish saguaro cactus who didn't have any arms yet. Did you know that saguaros don't even begin to grow arms until they are at least 50 years old? Amazing, isn't it? And while this is another example of centering the subject, it is also an example of a low-angle photograph. While Mr. Adams was probably standing for that photo, you can achieve a low-angle photograph by positioning yourself down low, as I did for this series. I crouched down so that these plants had the sky as their background. I captured different compositions, focusing on different areas. This one I actually don't have strict focus on, at least on any one of the major areas of the image, but just the tips of these pieces of the plant are in focus. And I think this was a mistake because it was a bit windy and it was difficult to achieve focus with the plants waving in the breeze, but I kept it in here because I kind of like it, but also to show you that I was experimenting with different compositions. Sometimes I do that. And then I get back home and I see which composition speaks to me when I can see it on a larger screen. Some of you may be wondering, why purchase a monochrome only camera? Can't I use monochrome color science in my camera or convert my photos to monochrome in post-processing? Or can't I shoot black and white film? Sure. And if you aren't interested in a monochrome only camera, I encourage you to do all of those things. In fact, even though I was using a monochrome only camera, I still captured my photos in RAW and I edited them. Ansel Adams certainly modified his photos in post-processing in a darkroom. He created techniques for dodging and burning to mold the photo to match his vision. Can I tell you a funny story? Raymond and I were in the Phoenix Art Museum a few years ago. I knew there was an Ansel Adams exhibition there. It was really cool because it was all about his process, including variations of each photo he took. But before we made our way there, we were wandering around a different gallery and I said, "Listen, that sounds like Ted." We hurried to the exhibition and sure enough, Ted Forbes of the Art of Photography was there in video form. It was an old video he made about Mr. Adams' darkroom processes and we immediately texted him a photo of it. Luckily, I have the luxury of pulling a raw photo into Lightroom and playing around to achieve a finished product in minutes. I can use the smarts in Lightroom to automatically mask just the sky and then edit the sky and foreground separately. I could even get down to painting certain areas of the image to edit. I chose to mask out the sky in this image so that I could bring out the definition in the clouds without bringing out too much definition in the desert below. I generally prefer to keep my edits to a minimum, but sometimes I find myself doing as Mr. Adams did, spending more time with each photo, dodging and burning, but digitally with lots of high-tech tools. I told myself that this year I am not allowed to purchase any more books until I've read the ones I already have. I've already checked a few out from the library, which I suppose I'm not counting, and I've purchased 3, including Mr. Adams' autobiography. A few of you recommended it when I shared my first Ansel Adams project, and I've held off until here I was looking into his work and really feeling amazed and respectful of the lengths that he went to achieve the results he wanted. He was obviously an adventurer, a visionary, and a very patient man. I haven't gotten very far into the autobiography yet, but I absolutely love learning about the backstory of any art or artist. If you have any recommendations for books like that, let me know. Here's another of Mr. Adams pointing up at a cactus photos. But this time, what struck me was the cropping of the cactus. We're only seeing a portion of it with some wisps of cloud in the sky beyond. I captured a series of photos of this saguaro and the moody sky beyond. I was thinking about shape, line, and texture. These were elements that Mr. Adams focused on as well. First, I could have switched over to a wide-angle lens and tried to get the entire cactus in the frame, but I liked the idea of concentrating the viewer's attention on just a portion of the cactus. You can see the ribs of the cactus leading the eye upward, only interrupted by holes that birds or other small animals made in the flesh of the cactus. You can see the texture of that flesh, smooth, but the monochrome image really brings out the bumps here and there, making rings around the arms. And this is all against the very soft texture of the sky beyond. Let's wrap this up. I like that there's a camera manufacturer that is willing to put true black and white first, instead of giving you a black and white option in a color camera. This has a monochrome sensor with no color interpolation. It will give you sharper black and white images than if you removed the color from an equivalent color digital camera. It would be subtle, but it's real. You'll also experience lower noise at higher ISO sensitivities, which also means a sharper image. And those are technical benefits, but I think the artistic benefits outweigh the technicals. I think limiting yourself in any way on an outing, whether that be by shooting in monochrome only or by allowing yourself one prime lens rather than a zoom or a bag full of lenses, these types of technical limitations can help you to develop your creativity and your vision. They will help you see the world around you in a new way. These will do more for you than any new camera or lens ever would. And speaking of which, I do have a comprehensive course that will leave you truly understanding the fundamentals of photography. It's free, and I will link to it in the description of this video. In it, I discuss composition and using monochrome, and I use exercises in all of my complete courses to reinforce learnings. I think you can and should do exercises like this no matter how long you've been a photographer. It can shake things up for you and help you realize new visions and interests. All right, what about me and this camera? I like shooting monochrome film a lot. I also enjoy simply switching over any of my cameras to monochrome color science. In fact, our Fujifilm X100V has all monochrome film recipes loaded into it right now. But I still think about the Leica Q2 monochrome. I used that camera for its launch in late 2020. I really loved it and considered trading in my Q2 for it. But what about the M11 monochrome? It's a good question. I think a lot of you out there are going to jump at this guy, but Raymond and I have a video planned that will go live in the next few weeks where we discuss what it's like to use an M camera. It will explain why we don't own an M body. Even though I definitely fell in love with the M11 last year when it was launched, and I do really enjoy this M11 monochrome. Speaking of that video, here are a few photos captured with the 50mm f1.4 Summilux lens. Raymond and I went to the Phoenix Art Museum with it. I love photographing museum spaces, and this camera was a wonderful opportunity to use the M11 monochrome. I'll share more from this outing in our video about M cameras. I know there are many of you out there that have been waiting for the next monochrome camera from Leica because I've heard it in the comments every time I mention Leica in a video. I know some are hoping for an SL2 monochrome, but I'm curious, what camera would you like to see in a monochrome variant? That SL2, maybe a Fujifilm X-T5 or X100V, a Nikon body, or is this your dream camera? Of course, I'd also like to know if you aren't so intrigued by a monochrome only camera. Let's talk in the comments. For at least the first few days of a video, I try to read all of the comments and reply to as many as I can. I truly enjoy discourse with you. Thank you to Leica for allowing me to borrow this new camera. It is always a pleasure to use any Leica gear. And thank you for watching. Remember that we post videos nearly every week, usually on Fridays, though this week there were 2 videos and neither of them were posted on a Friday. And we're also on social media, posting more often. We're now even on TikTok. There are links to social media below, and remember to hit the subscribe button here so we hopefully show up in your feed like the upcoming video about Leica M. And while I'm asking for things, please hit the like button if you appreciated this video, and I'll see you in the next one.